no television show should be 3 hours long. And that's what Monday Night Raw and Friday Night Smackdown are. They're television shows. You may not look at them as TV shows in the traditional way as a situational comedy or a weekly drama, but at the end of the day, they're considered television shows. That's why there's no off-season. That's why they get to skate around the rules that pertain mostly to traditional athletes. And rumors are having it that Monday Night Raw and Friday Night Smackdown might go from where they are now, and that's 2 2-hour programs, to 2 3-hour programs at the start of the new year. And I think that would be a huge mistake. And this is why you, the fan at home of WWE like myself, should not be in favor of Monday Night Raw or Friday Night Smackdown being 3 hours. Now I understand Monday Night Raw has been 3 hours until recently for going on 12 years. And frankly, I haven't been a fan of it the entire time. Sure, the first week I was a huge fan because if you remember, WWE used to run 3-hour Raws every so often as a special occasion. And in 2012, when WWE Raw went to 3 hours full time, the first episode was a special occasion. It had D-Generation X, it had The Undertaker, it had all the great stars, it had all the great segments. It was hyped up essentially like a special event. But then as the years went on, WWE has to find a way to schedule 3 hours of Monday Night Raw every single week, even if for some reason somebody's injured or they just don't have the storylines to fill it, aka what we saw throughout the pandemic. And Monday Night Raw, at the end of the day, is a part of Friday Night SmackDown and NXT in the WWE catalog. So while you may say soap operas every single day are all 1 hour apiece, equaling 5 hours a week, you have to remember each soap opera is individual. While SmackDown and Raw to you may seem kind of individual, they're all part of the greater WWE landscape that lead to the same WWE pay-per-view premium live events every single month. And that's why Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown are just television shows. They're not traditionally wrestling shows because they're there to give you the stories and to build you the bridge to the pay-per-views and the premium live events. You know, the events you used to pay for on pay-per-view where it would be 5 to 7 matches and everything would just be wrestling? Similar to now, right? 5 matches on a PLE and they're all matches. No segments, no stories, no chit-chat, no commercials. It's match after match after match. Similar to why an independent wrestling promotion doesn't run a show every single week. They run one once a month and they give you nothing but wrestling matches. That's a wrestling show. If an independent company ran a show every single week, there would probably only be a few wrestling matches and a lot of promotion to get you to the next wrestling show. WWE doesn't need 3 hours of programming, and more importantly, the WWE product suffers when there is 3 hours of programming. Because why? Well, because if there's 3 hours of programming, or even 2 hours of programming, the product suffers. WWE Raw is not just better at 2 hours, but it's better at 1 hour. It's better at 30 minutes. The whole idea of Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown is to give you a taste of wrestling and to get you wanting more. A lot of people said when Monday Night Raw moved to 2 hours recently that it wasn't long enough, that they wanted more. And frankly, that's a great thing. That is a promotion of why it should be 2 hours. Because on 2 hours, you're left with wanting more. On 3 hours, most of the time you're left with not wanting all of that, right? If you're a fan of wrestling and you're left wanting more, that's a good thing. If you leave the arena thinking that you wanted more, that's a good thing. Because, good news, folks, WWE and professional wrestling, there's a lot of it. A lot of it. In fact, they're churning out new episodes of WWE and AEW and professional wrestling every single week. In fact, multiple times a week. So if you're left leaving an arena or leaving a show wanting more, that is a good thing. There's a reason why the best movies of a horror series or a good sci-fi movie are the first ones. Because you just get a taste of the monster. You get a taste of the creature. You're left wanting more. And then by the time Friday the 13th 12 comes out, you've seen Jason more than enough that you couldn't ever even be close to scared or care about him one bit. WWE needs to look at that model. And yes, it's very tough because you have a program every single week. But as we've learned recently with The Undertaker, the specialness is gone. The Undertaker, we know, is really Mark Calloway. We know who he likes politically. We know what he eats on Friday nights with his family. We know what he drives. We know where he lives. We know how he feels about handkerchiefs and Harleys. And we know what he feels pretty much about every topic under the sun because no longer is The Undertaker that mystery that he was throughout the 90s. Now, He's Mark Calloway, a guy who plays The Undertaker, who we've seen now zillions of times. Overexposure is a big deal in the world of professional wrestling. That is why you keep matches special. That is why WWE Hell in a Cell matches, when somebody bleeds once, are more special than a death match on an indie scene where somebody bleeds right out the gate. Because everything matters. Everything has meaning. As The Undertaker said himself, wrestling is more about the story than it is about the wrestling. It's all about why, and the meaning why, and the mattering, right? Wrestling matches happen at house shows all the time, but we pay money to watch them on PLE or pay-per-view because the storyline that led us to that particular match and how that story will play into the match, more than it just being a wrestling match against two people we don't care about. But to the point of Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown needing to be less time is the fact that it's just a television show. There does not need to be 8 hours, if you count NXT, of WWE live television every single week and finding a way for fans to not get sick of that. If 2 hours isn't enough time, then we can have run over. We can have special events where sometimes it needs 3 hours or calls for 3 hours. But calling for 3 hours every single week is a very tough task because not every single week warrants 3 hours of television. And in a time where people and their attention spans are becoming less and less thanks to things like social media, having a 3-hour program is not just detrimental now, but it's more detrimental now than it was in the 90s or even in the 80s because, again, specialness is worn off, and the more exposure to something, the more you'll get bored. As a regular person, I have other interests outside of wrestling, and on a Monday night and a Friday night, it's hard to devote 2 hours to one product every single week without fail. So devoting 3 hours is just basically impossible. And that means I'm going to miss something. That means I'm going to watch Raw and SmackDown on replay and fast forward through a bunch of stuff and just get to what I want to see. And that hurts your experience because there's a reason why you watch the Super Bowl live. Because if you fast forward through a lot of the parts and you just don't care about some parts, it doesn't feel the same as watching it live and caring about the whole thing as it goes through. Monday Night Raw, in the middle of the Attitude Era when it was one of the highest rated programs, 1998, 1999, and 2000, all of those years, it was a 2-hour program. In fact, WWE in the height of the Monday Night Wars only had 2 hours of live programming every single week before SmackDown came about in late of 1999. Monday Night Raw had The Undertaker, The Rock, Triple H, Mankind, Stone Cold, The Hardys, The Dudleys, all of your favorite stars, and they put them on 2 hours a week. And what did that 2 hours a week do to you back in the Attitude Era days? They left you wanting more. They left you wanting to watch every single segment of Monday Night Raw without flipping the channel. They left you wanting to go to a house show to see a little bit more of the wrestlers. They made you want to buy the pay-per-view events to watch the matches. Monday Night Raw was the only WWE main show for many years, and at one time, it was even only 1 hour long before the Monday Night Wars, and it flipped to 2 hours in the mid-90s. Now WWE has, with NXT, 6 hours of programming every single week. And I add NXT because of the fact that NXT stars sometimes show up on Raw and show up on SmackDown, or as we've seen recently, SmackDown and Raw superstars show up on NXT. And if Monday Night Raw went to 3 hours, you would obviously need more NXT superstars to show up on Raw and more NXT superstars to show up on SmackDown. And for people who argue there's just so many superstars and not enough TV time, that's a great thing. I think about Saturday Night Live. If you've heard about Saturday Night Live and how they fit everything into 90 minutes, it's simple. They write about 20 sketches a week and only 9 make it on air. So 11 sketches, more than 50% of the ones that get created during the week, get cut. Don't make it. Don't have time on air. And you know what? That's fine because 90 minutes is the best product they can put out there, and they're only going to put out the best sketches, meaning they have some great sketches they just don't have time for, and that isn't a bad thing. That isn't a bad thing at all. If some wrestlers don't get time in the 2-hour format or don't get time on SmackDown in the 2-hour format, then that means that they didn't earn their spot in that 2-hour time. And WWE isn't the world of wrestling. It's just WWE. It's just the company that is essentially the NFL, the top tier, the one that everyone wants to be in. And frankly, it should be exclusive. It should be limited. It should be a place where if you are on WWE program, you are one of the elites, whether it's a wrestler itself or the storytelling that you're capable of. Your story should be worthy of finding its place in 4 hours of WWE programming a week. And if your story isn't good enough to fit in those 4 hours of WWE programming, they shouldn't create more programming. You should get a better story. WWE doesn't need to be a meritocracy. It doesn't need to be a democracy. It doesn't need to be where if you're hired by WWE or you're a professional wrestler, that everyone gets their shot and everybody gets an opportunity to play at that level and gets their story on a pay-per-view. Recently, WWE has actually shown us that it's quality over quantity with their 5-match pay-per-view cards. They're showing us that yes, there's some great stories on Raw and there's some great stories on SmackDown, but we're only going to provide each pay-per-view with the best of the best. We're not here to give everyone TV time and everyone spotlight and everyone money, and more importantly, we're also here to create exclusivity, so when there are good stories that don't make it to the pay-per-view, it means they're going to make it to the pay-per-view next month, and we have this rotation of superstars. So by going to a pay-per-view, it doesn't just mean you're going to see everyone on the roster, aka WrestleMania 35. It means you're going to see the best storylines that are available right now. They're going to cut right to the chase, they're going to get right through the red tape, and they're going to give you the best storylines they can. And on Friday Night SmackDown, on Monday Night Raw, that should be the same mentality. If your story didn't make it this week, then there's an opportunity next week. Because remember, there's a show every single week. And sometimes pay-per-view matches don't even need stories to be talked about every single week. I mean, we see some of the biggest WrestleMania matches involving Roman Reigns and John Cena and The Rock, and it's people who only show up every so often. Brock Lesnar is a good example of that. He was a headliner on many pay-per-view cards. He wasn't on Monday Night Raw or SmackDown every single week. And that could be the same for the current stars. That could be the same for the Drew McIntyres, the CM Punks, the Randy Ortons. We can make them just as special as we did Brock Lesnar and The Rock and John Cena and all those other guys by not having them on every single week. Raw and SmackDown, at the end of the day, are television shows. And if you flip through the television right now, you'll find, other than movies, there's no television show that's even 90 minutes long. It's hard to find, even in the history of television, another show that's 90 minutes long, let alone a show that is on multiple times a week. So if you're not wanting regular television shows to be 3 hours long every single week, American Horror Story, Fargo, Game of Thrones, whatever it be, then why do you want WWE to be 3 hours a week without an off season? 2 hours of Raw, 2 hours of SmackDown. Frankly, like I said, I would cut it down to even less than that. But when it comes to television, we're at least used to the 2 hour format. There'll be no fatigue. There'll be no layover. There'll be no issues with watching 2 hours. And will they hit a home run every single week? No. But is the opportunity to hit a home run every single week greater with less time? Yes. Because more time means more time to fill. And like I said, sometimes there's just stories that just don't fit. We learned during COVID and WWE's insatiable appetite to make money that they'll never turn off if they don't have to. And we saw bad stories, we saw boring matches, and we saw an unbelievable amount of filler because WWE refused to take an off season during the pandemic. And Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown being 3 hours long doesn't mean that they're going to add more time for The Rock, or John Cena, or Stone Cold, or The Undertaker, or Mick Foley. No. They're going to add more time for the mid-carders and the low-carders to get on that just waste a lot of time. They make it so that when you flip off to go turn on the baseball game or the football game, you might actually miss something you wanted to watch because the show's just so long that you don't know when that's going to happen. So you're flipping back and forth. Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown being a 2 hour program means that if you're watching it, it's easy to watch in full. You're not going to switch over. You're not going to flip off, especially on a Monday Night Raw when there's Monday Night Football on the other channel. Well, Monday Night Football and Monday Night Raw almost ran congruently, but with a 2 hour Monday Night Raw, it means you get to watch Raw without taking a break, and then if you want to check in on the football game after the fact, you can, because there is still time. It's probably only halftime. WWE Raw and SmackDown are television programs at the end of the day. They're shows that aren't really about putting on great wrestling matches. They're not here to give you a WrestleMania or Royal Rumble main event. They're there to give you a decent match for a main event and the rest of it being storyline build to get you to a PLE. And I think 2 hours is a perfect amount of time to do that. Am I a fan of some run over? Yes. Am I a fan of things being live and maybe adding a little extra time to that 2 hours? Sure. Sometimes there needs to be a special event. Sometimes there needs to be a Saturday night's main event. But that doesn't need to be a scheduled thing. We don't need to schedule all of these programs to be long, to be excessive, because when you schedule them that long, that means you have no option but to fill them. WrestleMania and SummerSlam this year are 2 nights. And if SummerSlam comes around and John Cena's hurt, and Roman Reigns is hurt, and Solo Sikoa is hurt, and Cody Rhodes is hurt, and other wrestlers are not there and hurt. Kevin Owens is hurt, Sami Zayn is hurt, Gunther is hurt, Damian Priest is hurt. Any one of these guys is hurt, or the storylines just don't fall through. Well, WWE is going to put something out there. They're going to give you 2 nights because they've already scheduled that time. They can't adjust. They can't reconfigure it and say, you know what, we only got 2 hours to fill here tonight, so it's okay that all those wrestlers are hurt. We can make it work. Could you imagine in 2000 or in 1995 if WWE WrestleMania 11 was scheduled to be 2 nights? They barely had enough talent to put on 1 night. Could you imagine if they were forced to do 2 nights? What would a main event on night 2 of WrestleMania 11 have been? Bam Bam Bigelow against the other guys in Lawrence Taylor's gang? I mean, when you have less time to fill, you are assured that only the best are going to get on. If WrestleMania this year was 1 hour long, every superstar that's a main superstar you can think of could be injured, could be hurt, and you would still have a very good WrestleMania card because it's very easy to fill 1 hour of good wrestling. Well, at least it's much easier to fill 1 hour of good wrestling than it is 8 hours of good wrestling. And 8 hours of good wrestling is dependent upon things running perfectly and smoothly. Raw being 3 hours every single week, sure, sometimes it flew by, sometimes it was a good show, but banking on having to fill 3 hours every single show means that you are going to have to throw something out there, even if you don't want to, even if the stories don't call for it. Monday Night Raw and Friday Night Smackdown need to stay 2 hours. Television shows in general need to not be 3 hours long and to stay under 2 hours. And I think we'll all be fine for it, because we all hearken for the days of the Attitude Era, or even the Ruthless Aggression Era for some of the younger fans. And what did all of those eras have in common? They all had 2-hour television shows and 3-hour pay-per-views. And if you're a fan of WWE, it's probably because you've been a fan for a very long time. And the day that you became a fan of WWE, it's most likely that WWE and professional wrestling had weekly television shows of no longer than 2 hours and pay-per-views no longer than 3 hours, including WrestleMania. So if it worked then, and it was great then why do this now? I don't know. WWE, though, is showing that in their pay-per-view events, they're all about quality over quantity. So I hope in the future on television, they stick to that same model.